My name is Kevin Martins. I'm the lead designer of World of Warcraft.
So Kevin, first question to you is what are some of the challenges when you make a new expansion? Because every expansion has a theme. For Legion it was artifact weapons, for Battle for Azeroth, Azerite armor, and for Shadowlands it's Covenant. So what are some of the challenges in basically creating a new theme for each expansion? Talk about that process.
Sure. I think a good metaphor for it is spinning plates. Azeroth is a huge world. World of Warcraft has so many features, and there's so many audiences and sub-audiences and things. We want to give everybody some love over time, and you can't fit everything into every expansion. And so finding the right things to do based on, like, what is the community really feeling right now? What are some things they don't even know that we could do, that we want to do? That's where sort of the new stuff comes from that's going to be super exciting. What are some of the parts of the games that we want to strengthen? So, for example, in this expansion, we've really overhauled leveling and alting. And for a few years now, people have been saying leveling takes too long, it's hard to do an alt, it's really time consuming, and so we've made some major changes in that. We've increased leveling speed by like 60 to 70% depending on your play style. We've got a brand new starting zone. Even alting in Shadowlands itself is faster, so if you've got multiple characters at our new level 50 and you're leveling to 60 in Shadowlands, you can pick your Covenant early on in your alt experience, and you can start getting endgame rewards as you play and play world quests as you're doing the actual story missions. And that's just some of the many features that we're trying to do. So sometimes it's not just about new features, it's also about taking some part of the game and really shoring it up.
Talking about the world of Shadowland, when you guys crunch the numbers, how do you guys go about deciding doing that, or whether to raise the level cap? And when you do crunch the numbers, what are some of the challenges to do that across the board? Is it really easy, like kind of just one fix and it applies to everything, or is there a much more depth than that?
So the number one design value at all of Blizzard, not just World of Warcraft, is one that we call focus on the fantasy. And so in short, leveling in an RPG is supposed to feel special. Over the years, the world has gotten bigger and bigger. We've just announced our 8th expansion. Shadowlands is the 8th one, plus, World of Warcraft itself. Azeroth is huge. It's got all these attached worlds, etc. To do justice to each level at a level cap of 120, or if we had maintained this, it would have gone up to 130. Either leveling becomes way too long, so that you gain a level, it feels special, it feels like you've earned it, whatever you got there, you have a little time to live with, assuming we can think of 130 things to give you for each level.
Right.
Or we have to rush through it to have a reasonable leveling time, and certainly the community would prefer a more reasonable leveling time. So we wanted to capture both of those things. What's a reasonable amount of time? How can we use the existing world right? Because right now you kind of take a wandering path as you level up in World of Warcraft, and it doesn't really have a cohesive story in most cases. And how do we do that in a way that levels still feel special? And so that's where that number squish came from. So to go to from 120 down to 60 levels, it gave us the ability to make those levels special and do it in a timely fashion. It's not a power change at all. It's got nothing to do with that. It's all about making levels feel special. So the way the new system works is all of the starting zones, including Death Knight and Demon Hunter, will be level 1 to 10. We have a brand new starting zone called Exile's Reach that I'll explain in some detail tomorrow on our deep dive panel, so I hope everyone can tune in for that. And then you get to choose which expansion story you want to level in. You can, we've given you the opportunity to scale any of the previous expansions, including Battle Azeroth, from 10 to 50, and around 50 you'll get quested naturally into Shadowlands, so you can have a more cohesive story. So if you want to play, I love Wrath of the Lich King, I want to capture that feeling again, you can do all of your leveling in Northrend in a way that's relevant to your character.
I have a lot of respect for the WoW dev team in general, because I can't think of another game that has had 15 years of longevity, without sequels or 2.0s or, upgrades, stuff like that. What are some of the challenges when working, I guess what I like to call it is like inside the box thinking? You have certain gameplay mechanics you have to adhere to. If you change them too much, it loses what it was. What are some challenges when designing new things, new raids? The Nazjatar raid was fantastic. The Mechanome raid battle was amazing. Like that mechanic of shrinking down and going into the robots. What are some of the challenges in making new designs, things like that, to keep the player enthralled and giving them new mechanics and ideas while still keeping the WoW infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, the way that you asked that question it sort of demonstrates a lot of the problems here, is that a lot has been done in World of Warcraft before over the last 15 years. A lot of the major ideas one might try in a game like this have been tried. So sometimes it's about taking a fresh take on something or giving it a twist that hasn't been done before, and there's a lot of challenge in that. I think the other aspect of it, though, is that the game has matured over time. The community has matured with it as well. And so what people want out of a game is a little bit different than it was before, generally speaking. For example, if you played WoW Classic right now, how fast people took down raid bosses when the first raid came out.
Yeah.
And what was different back then is that people weren't really used to working as a group yet, and they had to figure out how group mechanics, especially large group mechanics, how communication worked. There's a lot of tools that have been developed over the years for that, but also people become very practiced at that. So how we build raids, they just need to work completely differently than they did back then, but still feel the same. And I think that the Encounters team, for example, which is the design group that focuses on raids and dungeons, they do a really fantastic job of keeping things very fresh and moving along. Because even expansion to expansion, as the features change, as classes slowly get tuned, it's that long-term thinking, I think, which is the magic in all of this. And I think it's a real privilege to be working on a game that's lasted for 15 years and doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. So if you do want to change something core to the game, you can start thinking in 2, 4, 6-year cycles and slowly change something over time. And you don't usually get a privilege. A lot of games are one and done. This is your chance to do it. We can slowly start introducing a concept and then build on it if it takes off, and slowly push it to the side if it doesn't. And that's a real privilege.
Something I want to mention too is I just want to call out our engineers, and because they're continuously adding new features to our game too, right, to allow us to make new systems and even make the art look better. Like we're getting ray traced shadows this expansion too, which is super cool, something you'd see in a modern game.
The question of the month that I have to ask this question, because if I don't ask it, people will be like, why didn't you ask the question?
Okay.
We got a new class in Legion, and we skipped to Battle for Azeroth. Now it's Shadowlands, so everyone was expecting a new class. There's no new class announced yet, or as we know of. What goes into the decision to add any new class? When you guys decide to do one or not do one?
Sure, that's a good question. So when we're talking about a new class, which we talk about all the time, by the way, generally it's finding the best truly unique angle on something. So one of the things that's happened over the years, this is one of those slow-moving changes, is it's become very spec-focused. So most classes have 3 specs, some have 2, some have 4. And these specs are so differentiated at this point that in many cases they feel like 3 different classes in one. Which means we've covered a lot of ground on both fantasy and mechanics. So for the Demon Hunter to be added in Legion, we had to come up with an angle where it truly felt like this is different enough from the other classes that when you play it, it doesn't just feel like a coat of paint on something you've already done. And with the game being as big as it is and having as many classes and specs as it is, that's the real challenge. It's not like any lack of desire or something. It's if we are going to add it, it has to feel special enough and not stomp on something else. One thing that we're doing that may lead us to having a little more room is we are trying to refocus on class fantasy a little bit. So we are keeping all of the specs, but that level 1 to 10 range before you choose your spec for the first time, the last little while it has been defaulting to a specific specs. Like for example, priests always default to discipline priest. And we chose sort of, which spec would be the easiest for players to get a handle on, mixed with sort of captures the fantasy best. But as those specs have gotten more and more different, that has been difficult to do. And you're not necessarily giving people a good tour of that. So we're trying to give that 1 to 10 an overhaul for all classes so that it really focuses on the class as a whole fantasy before you choose your spec, which means some of those elements of all of the specs will be added into the beginning of the class. So that's one thing we're doing to sort of capture class fantasy rather than accidentally having 36 classes, which was really not the intent, but it kind of feels that way.
Right, because remember when you announced the Mechanomes and the Volpurin? I want to call them Vulpexes, but that's not the case.
Volpera, yeah.
Volpera. Like everyone was like, oh my god, engineers, because engineers has been on the forums since 2004. I remember seeing the engineer class, but that's not necessarily, you also have to look at it from a gameplay standpoint. Like, what does it add if we add this class? Is it just another damage dealer? So it takes time to roll that out and figure out what you want to do.
Yeah, with mechanics as core, as class mechanics, it's not just about variety. That's desirable, but it really they have to feel special. It can't just be visual variety. It has to be mechanical variety. And when those two worlds meet, we've covered a lot of ground. So we're still interested in new classes, and I suspect at some point we'll find the right angle on something that will match the right fantasy, and it'll happen again.
Is it difficult when designing a game, because WoW has such a variety of players? On the left side, which I'm totally not, are the min-maxers that look at an Excel sheet and like just, that's the game to them. And on the far right, which is I am, it's just like, what's the story? Look at this quest line taking me to Wayncrest Manor. This is awesome. You're geared wrong. I don't care. I'm having a great time. How do you meet that in between so both people are happy?
Man, that is a difficult challenge for sure. Trying to help those communities find each other. That's really what it's about. When people have strife in pickup groups, it's when their expectations don't match, where the min-maxer wants the perfect run and the other person's like, I just haven't seen this dungeon before, I just want to have a good time. We try to have those people find each other, and that's the short version of that answer.
We have a lot of these types of players on our team too, so like when we are playtesting, we have each type of person giving their impact or giving their input. So I think that really helps balance it out too.
So I'm going to talk about Sylvanas now, and I know you got to tread carefully because it's spoiler territory. But what do you Sylvanas is a very complex character. She has been since history of Warcraft, and she first turned into the Banshee Queen in Frozen Throne. What is her story to you guys? Is it a story of redemption? Is it a story of not escaping your destiny? Or is it a story of just finding out who your true self was the whole time?
It's it's not quite any of those things. What Sylvanas is doing makes sense to her, but I think it's a very human story. All of us do things in our lives that we sort of justify after the fact, and we make decisions that we argue are logical but are in fact emotional. And I think that much of the things that Sylvanas has done, she feels like she's doing the right thing, but if you broke it down, she may not be. However, opinions differ, and that's something we're trying to embrace with this character. We really are trying to give her a very human story, and I don't mean in terms of Azeroth races. I mean something that really speaks to people, like, oh, she wouldn't have done that. Well, at certain times she wouldn't have done that, and right now she is. So what's changed for her? And we're trying to give more of that internal, between despair and hope and anger and hatred and all the things that she feels, and she feels them very strongly. How does she justify all of this? So whether people agree or not, and whether it is what Sylvanas of 5 or 10 years ago would have done versus Sylvanas of now, we're trying to show a real journey here. And I hope that people get enough insight into why she made these decisions, that even if it's something that they don't think she should have done, they understand what brought her there now. And that's what I like about storytelling. When you have this many years to tell it, we can actually do that, which is really rare in a video game. So I hope we can do a great job for people.
Do you have any special things planned for undead players, because obviously this affects them a lot more than other races in the land of Azeroth?
Yes.
Yes, a lot. Easter eggs, special quests, anything like that?
Yeah, we will try to explain what's happening with that race in the game as well, and we also have some more story for the Death Knights. Now that Bolvar is a little less frozen on his throne and a little more involved here, he will be a character that's going to play a big role here, and that's part of why we're unlocking Death Knights for all races now. And so, yeah, we're trying to do service to a bunch of the different individual race stories, and there's that spinning plates analogy again. Everybody's got stuff going on,
right,
and we'll try to do the ones that are most pertinent to the current story, as well as some things that just need some love now, because it's been a while. Like Gnomes just needed some love, so finally, Mechagon,
really did.
right? Mechagon, we tried to do our absolute best Gnome fantasy we could with the Mecha Gnome angle, and I hope we did a good job.
And then when does Shadowlands come out? When it's done.
When it's in 2020.
Perfect.